Scattered across the Mapumalanga Escarpment in South Africa, thousands of stone circles, walls and terraces form a landscape so vast it's only fully visible from the air. One arrangement in particular, a compact ring of standing stones, has been called the oldest man-made structure on Earth, claimed at roughly 75,000 years old. Older than Sumer, older than Egypt, older than Stonehenge. If that date is real, everything we think we know about early human civilization is wrong, but proving it requires something no one has yet delivered. The Mapumalanga Escarpment rises sharply into the thin mountain air of South Africa, presenting a high-altitude terrain that defies easy explanation. At ground level, a visitor walking the ridges encounters only crumbling, moss-covered rocks and waist-high grass. But step back, ascend the highest peaks or look down from a high-altitude flight and the scattered ruins resolve into an extensive, structured network. Across this rugged environment, tens of thousands of circular stone enclosures cluster together, connected by a complex web of dry stone walls. Long, linear pathways cut across the hillsides like ancient highways, linking homestead complexes to stone-walled agricultural terraces that carved entire mountain slopes into flat, arable steppes. Mapping this region from the air reveals a level of planning that ground-level observation obscured for generations. These are not isolated monuments or random piles of rock. They are the surviving pieces of an engineered regional system. Nestled within this vast, interconnected network lies a singular, compact cluster of upright standing stones that stands apart from everything else on the plateau. The Blauboschkral stone ruins stand on an elevated ridge near the misty town of Kaapsehoop, overlooking an open horizon. Here, roughly a dozen dolomite monoliths rise from the grass, arranged in a rough circle with the tallest upright stone reaching 2.5 meters into the mountain air. In 2003, bush pilot Johann Heine photographed the site from the air, publicising his find. Soon after, author Michael Tellinger popularised the ruins through books and lectures, introducing them under a bold promotional banner. Adam's Calendar, the oldest man-made structure on Earth. Proponents highlight how the stones seem to mark the cardinal directions and trace solstitials and equinoxes, noting a shadow relationship where a tall stone casts its mark across a flat central rock. By calculating these alignments against the slow historical drift of the stars, alternative researchers proposed a startling timeline suggesting the arrangement is roughly 75,000 years old. This alternative interpretation presents a compelling vision of a vanished, advanced culture. It invites a closer examination of whether this celestial geometry represents an engineered calendar from the dawn of humanity, or a modern pattern projected onto a much different past. The claim that these standing stones form a 75,000-year-old calendar depends on a process called precessional back calculation. Because the Earth slowly wobbles on its axis over a 26,000-year cycle, the positions of the stars and the paths of the sun across the horizon shift in a predictable pattern. By looking at the alignment of these dolomite blocks today and mathematically tracing the night sky backward through time, researchers estimated a moment when the stones aligned with the rising stars of Orion's belt. This celestial calculation forms the foundation of the site's extreme age estimate, suggesting a timekeeping purpose from deep antiquity. Yet measuring an alignment in the sky is different from finding physical evidence of construction on the ground. To establish when these stones were actually erected, scientists look for direct markers, which present their own challenges. Lichen growth and weathering patterns can suggest long exposure to the elements, but local climate, surface disturbance and colonization rates make these indirect methods highly variable. The dolomite rock itself is geologically ancient, dating back hundreds of millions of years. But the age of the stone does not reveal when humans selected, transported or stood it upright. Weathering of a rock surface only indicates exposure, not the human act of arrangement. Direct scientific dating faces physical limits. Standard radiocarbon dating, which measures organic carbon in charcoal or bone, only works up to about 50,000 years, leaving a 75,000-year target out of reach even if undisturbed organic material were found beneath the stones. Optically stimulated luminescence can date when surrounding soils were last exposed to sunlight, but this measures when the dirt buried the stones, not the moment they were carved or dragged into position. Without a systematic peer-reviewed excavation at the circle itself, the date inferred from the stars remains a compelling hypothesis rather than an established archaeological fact. Reports of high voltage spikes, magnetic fluctuations and acoustic frequencies have introduced a different kind of claim to the stone circle. Visitors describe stones that ring when struck and handheld meters registering unusual electrical currents. But a reading on a screen is not an archaeological conclusion. To establish these phenomena as genuine anomalies, researchers must use calibrated instruments with documented sensitivity under varying weather conditions. They must compare these readings against control locations with identical geology that lacks stone arrangements. The surrounding region contains magnetite-rich dolomite and geological faults that naturally warp compasses, while nearby power lines and mobile transmitters introduce modern interference. Even the ringing of the stones can be explained by their density and shape, acting as natural acoustic cavities. Without independent replication, peer-reviewed protocols and systematic environmental logging, these reports remain unverified. Even a proven physical effect would reveal nothing about the age of the stones, their purpose, or the intent of their builders. Step away from the isolated standing stones of Kaapsehoop, and the surrounding Mapumalanga Escarpment opens up to a vast, interconnected archaeological reality. This is the ancestral home of the Bokoni, a network of indigenous Coney-associated farming communities that transformed the Highveld. Here, archaeologists study a cohesive system where stone-walled homesteads, circular cattle enclosures and terraced fields work in harmony. These enclosures served as the central hub of daily life where farming, protection and livestock management intersected. To farm the steep, difficult slopes, these builders engineered massive stone terraces to retain soil and manage water runoff. They carved paths and road-like corridors through the hills, designed specifically to guide the movement of livestock and keep cattle clear of active crops. Excavations across these settlements show a rich domestic life, uncovering decorated pottery, ironworking slag, and animal remains that prove active trade and local production. But dating these structures presents distinct challenges. The highly acidic soils of the escarpment quickly destroy organic materials, making standard radiocarbon dating of bone or wood difficult. Instead, researchers use optically stimulated luminescence to measure when the soil trapped directly beneath the stone foundations was last exposed to sunlight. These tests, along with pottery comparisons and stratigraphy, show that the peak of this complex society occurred between 1500 and 1800, with construction starting as early as the 15th century. While this regional timeline cannot assign an exact day to every individual stone arrangement, it points to a thriving, highly organised African society that mastered landscape engineering. Rather than primitive ruins, the escarpment preserves a massive, coordinated effort to shape the earth for generations. Reducing these extensive stone ruins to mere cattle pens creates a false choice. It forces a narrative where the escarpment must either host a 75,000-year-old lost empire or nothing more than basic animal enclosures. The reality on the ground reveals a highly structured, organised system. Each homestead functioned as a domestic, agricultural and social hub at the same time. Managing thousands of livestock required deliberate design, from protective enclosures to dedicated movement routes and seasonal grazing access. The stone terraces carving the hillsides were not temporary walls, but long-term structural investments in crop cultivation, designed to manage water and protect soil. Connecting these homesteads is a network of stone-lined pathways that carefully directed herds through the wider terrain, keeping animals clear of active crops. This level of organisation supported a thriving society that participated in regional trade and economic networks. To build on this scale required coordinated labour, regional planning and practical engineering knowledge of the terrain. In human history, practical utility and ritual significance are rarely mutually exclusive. A homestead structure can secure livestock while also holding sacred value. While the vast majority of these ruins served an integrated economic purpose, a singular specific arrangement like the Kayapsa monoliths could still have held an additional ceremonial or astronomical role. The extensive 500-year-old chronology of the Bokoni farmers does not automatically assign an exact date to this specific circle of standing stones. In archaeology, later communities frequently occupied, modified, or incorporated much older features. Yet, distinguishing between an ancient dolomite rock and the human act of deliberately positioning it requires strict physical evidence. To establish an older construction date, researchers must look directly beneath the monoliths. This requires controlled excavation around and under the stones, seeking undisturbed stratigraphy that shows clear soil deposits before, during, and after construction. Within these sealed layers, archaeologists look for organic materials like charcoal or bone directly associated with the placement event, allowing for precise radiocarbon tests. Optically stimulated luminescence must date the sediment buried at the exact moment of construction, rather than later sediment layers. These samples must be verified by independent laboratories with transparent uncertainty ranges and repeatable results. Scientists also need clear proof that these blocks were deliberately positioned at that earlier date, rather than being natural geological outcrops that later builders simply incorporated into a wall. While an earlier construction phase remains a theoretical possibility, the leap from several centuries to 75,000 years requires a level of extraordinary, secure evidence. At present, no such physical proof has been demonstrated on the Highveld, leaving the deep antiquity of the stone circle unverified. 75,000 years ago, during the Middle Stone Age, early Homo sapiens were already expressing complex symbolic behaviour. They engraved geometric patterns onto red ochre and crafted delicate shell beads in caves along the South African coast. But these were portable, personal expressions of mind and ritual. There is no universally accepted evidence of monumental stone architecture from this deep past. Globally, permanent engineered settlements, agriculture, and complex stone structures like Göbekli Tepe only appear much later, around 12,000 years ago. If a permanent astronomical monument on the Mapumalanga Escarpment were securely dated to 75,000 years ago, it would shatter these established timelines. It would mean that ancient hunter-gatherers possessed unrecognized systems of coordinated labor, engineering, and long-term planning, long before the first seeds of farming were ever sown. The historical stakes of this claim are monumental, which is precisely why the physical proof must be absolute. Today, the Mapumalanga Escarpment still guards its deepest secrets. If these standing stones truly predate our oldest civilizations, they will rewrite the story of humanity. But a mystery is not solved by belief alone. It demands physical proof. Until the soil yields its true age, the stones remain silent. What do you think lies buried here? Share your thoughts below.